Hey, Bill and Becky, this is Jackie from Ohio, and I wanted to thank you guys for what you're doing with Catching Up to Fi. I love the podcast, I love the Facebook group, and learning so much. I feel like those of us that are catching up are sandwiched between two generations, the millennials and the baby boomers, and no one's talking to us. But you guys have solved that problem, and I am so grateful for all the great content that you're putting out. So keep up the great work and I look forward to the next podcast.
So don't say you have to live paycheck to paycheck. This is a choice you're making. Let's just start with that. Just live with that for a month. That's step one, right? But again, I want to stress that there's nothing wrong with enjoying life, however that means for you. But financial freedom should be the first priority, in my view. If you're a quarterback in the NFL, you can't work from home. I get that. There are some jobs you got to show up. Although there are some quarterbacks that I think should stay home, but that's a whole nother. Look. I live outside of Washington D.C. That's a whole different discussion. But you really need to think outside the box and just think about these issues and live with these questions for a little bit before you reject them out of hand. And then one person in the group got to him and he just said, I just want to get a little better every month. If I can just make a little progress every month, I'll be good. And I thought, that's the answer right there.
Hi, and welcome to Catching Up to Fi, a podcast on mindset, money, life on the journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Becky, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your hosts. We're here to help you with your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting from.
We're going to talk to other late starters, experts, and we'll explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to Fi together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to Fi. I'm Bill Yount with my co-host Becky Heptig, and today we have Rob Berger on the show. Rob Berger wears many hats. He is a deputy editor at Forbes, an investor, a lawyer, a personal finance blogger, and a YouTuber. He founded the popular website doughroller.net. His advice has been featured in Forbes, MSN Money, U.S. News and World Report, and Yahoo Finance. His book is titled Retire Before Mom and Dad: The Simple Numbers Behind a Lifetime of Financial Freedom. The difference here is we are mom and dad. He recently published a show on his platform called Catching Up on Retirement Savings. When he isn't writing about money, you can find him doing burpees and spending time with his wife and two grown children. Rob gave us a shout out on his YouTube channel in a show on late starters to financial independence. Becky and I reached out to him to join us on our show. He generously did not hesitate to say yes. Rob Berger, welcome to Catching Up to Fi. Let's roll.
Bill, Becky, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, we're so glad to have you here today. And let's just jump right in. We are going to talk through your book, Retire Before Mom and Dad. And you start that book out by saying, we've been duped. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah. So just over years of writing about personal finance and talking to people, particularly if we talk about, say, early retirement or starting late but catching up, right? There's this view that unless you make a lot of money, which generally is defined as a bit more than you're actually making, that's usually what a lot of money means, right? At least it does for me. That unless you make a lot of money, then this just isn't possible. Early retirement's not possible, or catching up if you started late is not possible. And I think part of the reason is because we look at, say, our income, whatever it might be, and we compare it to some big number we need to retire. And we can't draw the line from point A to point B. It seems impossible. I'm making whatever, 30, 40, 50,000. I need $1 million or more to retire, if that's the number, let's just say. And those two numbers don't seem to be able to go together. You can't get from one to the other. And the reality is you can. Obviously, the more you make, of course, the more perhaps you can save and end up with. But you can turn a relatively small amount of money into piles of cash. You do need a few things. You do need some time. You need to do smart things with the money and invest it wisely. But what you find out is that when you look forward and you see that nest egg, whatever it is for you, 500,000 or whatever it is that you've saved over so many decades, I guess, the vast majority of that actually isn't from your savings. I mean, it's a consequence, but it's the compounding, right? That was sort of the thing that a large part of the book was trying to bring compounding to life so people could actually see it and feel it, because the numbers just don't make any sense. If you just ask someone who's 25, how much would you have to save each month to have $1 million when you retired? The numbers are all over the place. They don't really know. And they almost always assume a much, much larger number. So anyway, I guess maybe a long answer to your question, but that was the idea, that we've been duped into thinking we can't do this. And I think the big part of the point of the book was to say, yeah, actually you can, and here's how you do it.
Yeah, I'd like to commend my co-host, Becky. You may not know that she started with a net worth of 0 at 50, and her blog has started at 50. By 63, they'd amassed $1.4 million and retired comfortably. So yes, it absolutely can.
That's amazing.
Let's move into the 5 lies about we've been duped. Almost everyone believes them as a life of illusion. The first lie you bring up in your book is financial freedom requires a big salary. We talked about that. And one of the things you quote in there is actually a $50,000 earner for 45 years, saving 10% per year, can amass a net worth of $3,400,000 and some $1,000. That's what you're talking about when you can't connect point A to point B. It's incredible what you can do if you're slow and steady and win the race.
It really is. And the thing is look, every situation is going to be different. People will ask me, what if I don't earn 10%? What if I earn 9%? Which is important. And the book talks about that. Small differences end up with, big consequences. But the point still remains that if you diligently save and invest the money, compounding is going to take over. It's really the superpower that we have. It's going to take over, and it's going to generate a lot of wealth for those that are patient enough and consistent enough to save and invest. And so, and again, I set it up that way because, again, as I mentioned earlier, $50,000 a salary into $3.4 million, that just doesn't, even my mind doesn't wrap around. I can't tell you in writing the book how many times I said, wait a minute, I did that wrong. Let me check the math again. I'd go back to an online calculator and put the numbers in, because I kept telling myself that I know compounding is powerful, but that can't be right. But trust me, it is. I checked it more times than I care to admit.
One of the things too, one of the myths you talk about, another lie, is that it takes 40 years to get there. Now, we're late starters. We have less time. Compounding doesn't necessarily work as well for us. But in 15 years, you can retire. I started at 50 as well. And I will retire at 63 to 65 on time, thankfully. And it can be done. How do we do that?
Yeah. So my approach for the late starter is really, they need to take on the mentality of the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early, which is sort of viewed as the young person's approach to retirement. You start in your 20s so you can retire in your 30s or 40s, or maybe early 50s. But if you're starting late, you really have to take that same mentality, because you're trying to get it done in a short period of time. And you have an advantage in most cases, because most folks, say, like you guys started at 50, most folks have Social Security ahead of them. Some people may have a pension, many don't. But so you actually have some advantages actually over the 20-something that wants to retire early. You also eventually have Medicare. But you have to take that FIRE mentality. And it does require making some sacrifices. Although what I've found is that when I make these financial sacrifices, and maybe I cut back in some way, and when I've done that in the past, what I found is what I thought was going to be this big sacrifice turned out actually not to be. Whatever it is I gave up, and it was usually small, silly stuff, but, felt like a sacrifice for maybe a week or two, and then I completely forgot about it, and it was no longer a sacrifice. But, you have to make these decisions and sacrifices. They are sacrifices in order to increase your savings rate, as much as you can. If you can get it, in the right range, you can, and you guys are evidence of that. You can generate a lot of wealth in a decade, or in 15 years, or 20 years, whatever your relatively short savings period is. And, you can get it done.
Rob, that idea flows right into your line number 3, which is happiness is expensive. You were saying that you gave up some things and then you really didn't miss them that much.
I'll give you the medium length story. So I was a lawyer at a big firm, and listeners might immediately say, oh, well, he made a lot of money. Well, I suppose I did have an above average salary. What I ended up doing though, so I made partner after 8 years, and I did what a lot of partners do. I got a fancy car and joined a country club. And 2 years later, I quit the partnership, took a 1/3 pay cut, and got rid of the car and the country club. And I realized that what I thought would make me happy, all these things, didn't. Now, by the way, there's nothing wrong with a nice car and a country club membership if that's what you want. My take on it, though, then was I want my financial freedom first. If there are nice things that I want, that's fine. Whatever nice is for me, it'll be different for you. That's great. And I have nice things now. No, don't have a country club. I drive a Honda minivan, but I have other nice things, right? But never at the sacrifice of the financial freedom. So that was the idea. Whether it was something big, like a country club membership that I gave up, or something relatively small, like I used to get a mocha every day at Starbucks. It's funny, that actually was a habit that was harder to break than getting rid of the country club membership. That was actually easy. It was giving up the daily mocha that was hard. And, after 2-3 weeks, I didn't miss it. And if I had one today, I'd probably be sick for 24 hours after drinking it. So, yeah, I don't think we're very good at knowing what makes us happy. I think we all think we know what makes us happy. And we have these routines and habits, and we kind of flow through life. And if we were to change something, we would be unhappy at first, whether it's, food or just our daily routine or whatever. But I think in many cases, once we got over that initial feeling of pain, we'd find out, that probably wasn't as important to me as I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean, the latte factor is real, and we'll talk about that because of the compounding of small gains in your savings rate. Number 4 in your 5 lies is investing is complicated, and it's intimidating to the late starter because their education has been lacking for years and years, and they think investing is too hard to do. Is it?
Yeah. The investing part is incredibly simple. I mean, you can have a very well diversified, low cost investment portfolio with a couple of mutual funds or ETFs. That's all you need. And they would give you exposure to literally tens of thousands of companies, and tens of thousands of bonds. And it's as simple as that. And that portfolio, I would put that portfolio up against any complicated portfolio by an investment advisor. And I've seen them because my viewers of my YouTube channel email me their portfolios. And I had people email me portfolios that had more than 30 ETFs. And it's absolutely absurd. And actually, when you compare those complicated portfolios to, say, a 3 or 4 fund simple index portfolio, you find that they either underperform, or maybe it's just the same, but before fees. After fees, they almost always underperform. So investing isn't complicated. Now, I will add one thing. It's not complicated in the same way that golf is not complicated. Golf is a very easy game. Hit the ball, put it in the hole. It's very simple, but it's not easy to play, right? And there's one aspect to investing that's not easy. Simple, but not easy, and that is sticking to your investment plan no matter what the market is doing, no matter what Jim Kramer happens to be saying on his show, or what the pundits are saying, or what the economy is doing. Are we going to default on our debt or not? What's inflation doing? This, the stock market goes way up or way down, and all these things cause some investors to either chase after returns because they feel like they're missing out, or run away from, say, the stock market, or last year, even the bond market, because they're afraid of what the market's doing at that moment in time. That's the hard part, because I think generally when you do that, you hurt yourself. You're better just to have a simple investment plan and stick to it, no matter what the market's doing, no matter what the economy is doing. And you'll have some good years and you'll have some bad years. Long term, you'll end up with better results than if you're jumping in and out of investments trying to guess at what the next 6 or 12 months are going to look like.
Number 5 is, these are all important, but to me personally, number 5 is probably the biggest one on this list, and that is that debt is a fact of life. And I know how big of a drag debt can be on your lifestyle and your portfolio. Can you tell us a little bit about your idea about debt?
Yeah. So my view of debt, 25 years ago was probably not different than most people. We didn't have soul crushing debt, but it was like, yeah, debt's what you do. You get a mortgage for the house. You borrow for cars. You borrow for student loans. Maybe you borrow to get some furniture for the house or to remodel or whatever. And I'm not suggesting that all debt is bad and that you shouldn't. I think a mortgage can make sense. I think student loans within reason can make sense. But I sort of had an aha moment where I said, look, I don't want to live the next. I was probably, goodness, I don't know, my late 30s, and I thought I don't want to live the next 20 years in debt. I want to buy my financial freedom. And so part of that for me was getting out of debt. And it took me a while. I set a goal to be totally debt free. This was in 2005. And I said it was January 15th, actually. So we're almost January 15th. I gave myself 7 years and I didn't make it. But I was debt free maybe after 10 or 11 years. It's a good feeling. I mean, because it's just part of the sort of the journey to financial freedom. You now control every dollar you have. You're not using it to pay for things you bought 10 years ago. Again, the mortgage is probably the last thing I would pay off if someone were coming up with a plan. But yeah, I think this notion that we have to just finance a car and that's just how things work. And the answer is no, you don't. I understand every circumstance is different. You may not be able to get from where you are today to being able to buy a car for cash a month from now. It may take you some time to get there, but I think the first step in getting there is recognizing that, you don't have to finance all these purchases. You can put yourself in the position to pay cash. We paid cash for my Honda Odyssey. So there you go.
Why do you drive a minivan? You don't have any kids at home.
So, we actually went down to one car, which my wife was very skeptical of. And I got rid of my car and it worked great. But then a granddaughter came along. We needed a car that could handle a lot of people. And so that's why we got a Honda Odyssey. So yeah, I'm now, chasing 60, financially free, and I'm in a minivan. What can I tell you?
You know what? I didn't realize that you start your family life with a minivan and your family life comes back around like a boomerang and you end up in a minivan again.
Oh, by the way, my wife drives a convertible. True. She has a convertible. It's true story.
Yes, I'm on her side. I know what you mean, Rob. We buy our cars. We don't have any kids at home anymore either, but we buy our cars with the idea of, can I put a car seat in it for the grandkids?
All right, let's move on to the matrix. You talk about the matrix in your book, and it is apropos because there's two directions that you can go somewhere in life financially. You talk about taking the blue pill and you end up in the cubicle world. You talk about taking the red pill and Neo gets to see the world as it really is. Your book is the red pill, is it not?
That was the idea. I mean, because I don't think most people see money this way. Most people spend everything they make. Most people have convinced themselves that they don't have a choice in the matter. That's probably the worst part of it. It's not actually living paycheck to paycheck, because we've all been there at some point. It's believing that you don't have any choice. You can't move past paycheck to paycheck. And that was sort of the whole idea, really, of the matrix analogy. Because I think people, I'll talk to people and I'll say, I'll say, do you have a Netflix subscription? And they'll say, yeah, but come on, Rob, we're not talking about that. That's small dollars. And, I want to enjoy life. I said, I'm not here to tell you I have a Netflix subscription. I'm not here to tell you to get rid of it, but you need to take ownership of your decisions. And if you go out to eat, and by the way, nothing wrong with going out to eat. I'm not here to tell you not to go out to eat, but if you do those things, and you have a Netflix subscription, among other things, you could choose to save. So don't say you have to live paycheck to paycheck. This is a choice you're making. Let's just start with that. Just live with that for a month. That's step one, right? And go from there. So that's the problem, though. People do this and they think, I have no way out. There's no other way to do it but the way I'm doing it, paycheck to paycheck. Now, by the way, in fairness, there are some people out there that really are living paycheck to paycheck, and they need to get some things solved, whether it's more income, getting out from some debt. Some people have medical debt, certainly not a fault of their own. So I understand that there are all different kinds of circumstances. But what I had in mind were the folks that have convinced themselves that there's really no other way to live, when in reality there is.
All right. We move on to the sections of the book, and you talk about superpowers. And one of the concepts, and you really, really, really do a good job with illustrating compounding, as you mentioned before. You talk about the money multiplier. What are the aspects of the money multiplier, and how does it make such a difference in our life?
Well, so yeah, again, we go back to this idea, say, of turning 50,000 into 3.5 million or whatever, and that doesn't seem possible. And in one way, it's not, right? Because if you took all your money and just stuck it under the mattress, you'd never get to whatever retirement number you need. It wouldn't be possible, or it would be highly unlikely. The compounding, what happens is, over time, like a snowball that turns into an avalanche. I mean, the compounding takes over, so that you're actually earning more on your investments than your contributions. And when you get to later in life or later in your journey, you can easily be making, in a typical year, far more from compounding, say, than you are at your job, for example. And that's quite common for long-term savers and investors as they sort of move through, this journey. But it's really hard to see that. It's really hard to see that, particularly when you're 25 and you're just starting out and you're thinking, I could sacrifice and maybe save 50 or $100. What good does that do? Particularly when, by the way, you look at your account after 6 months and your $100 each month for a total of $600 is now worth $534 because the market's gone down. Now you're really, now you're really thinking, well, I don't understand how this is going to work. But long term, the compounding kicks in. So again, the book was an attempt to show that so people could see it. It's a hard thing to actually see and appreciate.
You give an example in your book of this, which I thought was really interesting, and I had not heard of this, but you used the birch scent.
Yeah.
In your book. Can you tell us the story behind that?
Yeah. So they ended up selling it, right? And I'm looking at some of the math now, and even these numbers don't seem possible, but they ended up selling it, and I forget the family name, but it was for like 1.2 million, right? But actually, and it had passed down from generation to generation, but if they'd actually invested it right away from compounding, they would have ended up with like 3 or 4 times that amount. And again, this was over a couple hundred years. So this is obviously not, the point was just to sort of demonstrate the power of compounding. But it's kind of like, I one day calculated how long it would take me to be a billionaire with a B, not a millionaire, but a billionaire. And if you live long enough, we can all be billionaires, right?
Right.
Now, it turns out I would have to live a good deal longer than I probably will, but not an insane number. Right? I mean, most people, even if you start with 0, you could be a billionaire. Like, let's say you're 40. By the time you're 120 or so, maybe 130, probably not going to happen. I will grant you that. But again, it shows the power of compounding. And I thought the birch scent was just maybe a good way to demonstrate that.
I guess Warren Buffett's going to live forever.
It seems like that. I'll tell you, Charlie Munger impresses me. I mean, he hasn't lost a step, and he's 99.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. They're going to be trillionaires.
Your reference to Warren Buffett is a good one, because most of his wealth is compounding. And if he would have had, say, God forbid, passed away 20 years ago, the amount of wealth he had then was significantly less than he has today. Again, it's all compounding. Mm-hmm. Of course, when you have whatever he's got now, I don't even know what it is. Is he at 100 billion? That compounds pretty quickly.
Yep. Let's move on to a couple of rules of thumb. you talk about how changes in expenses can have a big impact. And that one was interesting because we have to look at what we spend really first. Now, you learned from Mr. Money Mustache back in the day about a rule of 752. I had never heard of this. It was very illuminating to me to look at expenses this way. Can you take us through a little bit of the math of the rule of 752?
Well, the idea is just behind the rule is just compounding, right? And so the idea was to figure out over, say, a 10-year period, if you gave up something on a weekly or monthly basis using the rule of 752, and I actually had rule of 857, which is a little different because of the difference in. I think he trying to remember. Yeah, he assumed a 7% return, and I think I changed it to 9.3, and that changed the number. But if you multiply the amount you're going to reduce your spending by, it'll show you what you could accumulate in 10 years. I then took it out, the rule of 36,036 over 45 years. And the idea was to expand it over, say, a working career, someone that works from 20 to 65 or 25 to 70 or whatever it might be. The number itself, like the rule of 752, right, for 10 years, the rule of 36,036 for 45 years shows you the power of compounding. I mean, that's what you have to multiply a 45-year number by to get the result because of compounding. The book walks through, like if you give up a latte or if you give up, different expenses, what that will look like. And so it takes, and the point, by the way, is not to convince anyone they need to give up a latte. People like their lattes, they can keep them. The bigger point was, if you can, every dollar you can figure out how to save, particularly, by the way, if it's a dollar you can save without making big sacrifices, it's going to compound into large numbers after, pick your time period. But I think it's for the purpose of long-term investing, I used 45 years.
So just to give our listeners some real numbers, we've got some examples here. For example, if you gave up a latte and your example was 3 times a week at $4, so that's $12 times your $857 is $10,000 and $10,284
after 10 years.
After 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Eating lunch out 2 times a week, $30 times the $857 was $25,710. So you would take whatever dollar amount that you're saving and multiply it by the $857 for 10 years or
right.
the $36,036 for 45 years. And
right.
those turn into unbelievably large numbers.
Yes.
Something that you just drive through Starbucks or turn on your Netflix, or, for me, it was pick up the Dr. Pepper in the grocery store line while I'm standing there. Anything that you can save turns into some significant dollars.
Yeah. And I may be jumping ahead of, but the one thing I'll say is that one thing that can be exhausting for some people is to have to think about ways to save 24/7. I'm in the grocery store, as you mentioned, or I'm going out with friends, and to constantly be thinking, how can I reduce spending? For some people, it can just over time become somewhat exhausting, right? And I get that. So a lot of the book stresses saving money on monthly bills. So, for example, if you reduce, you shop for car insurance and you can reduce your bill by $30 a month. The nice thing about that is you do that once, and then the savings continue month after month, and you're done. I call it one and done. It's not something you have to think about anymore. It's fine to save money at the grocery store, right? That's not a bad thing. But I think trying to get these sort of monthly bills as low as possible, and then just let the savings accumulate, and then automate your investing so that whatever amount you've saved goes into whatever your 401k or an IRA, I think is a really good way to think about how you can generate more savings.
And that is an important point to make. We can think about all these savings and work on our budget and look at what we're spending, but to make the difference, then we've got to turn around and invest that difference.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
if we don't, it'll just evaporate.
And you might be able to invest more than the savings, right? Because the thing about savings is it's after tax, right? So if you save $30 a month on your car insurance, well, that $30 you had been paying is after taxes come out of your paycheck. If you're saving in a traditional 401k, you could actually save more than $30, and the effect on your take-home pay, would be $30. But you might be able to, depending on your tax situation, you might be able to save $35 or $40. But the key is to go into your account, increase your contribution by whatever amount you're saving, or again, perhaps more if you're putting it in a traditional 401k. Because if you don't, the money, at least in my experience, the money is just gone. If you just let it go into your checking account, it's gone, and you don't even know what happened to it. At least I wouldn't know. So I think that's a really important part of the process.
Well, it's really downsizing, and downsizing is really important for late starters. And if you can downsize your expenses, much like you say, over a 45-year time period, using your rule of 36,036, if you save on your I think it's monthly expenses $4,000, you end up with $5 million at the end of 45 years.
Right. Now, again, those are big numbers, and they're not going to apply to most people, but they underscore the potential, right? And that's really the key. And I say that because I hear all the objections. And people will say, "Well, Rob, you assume 9.3% return. That's ridiculous." Okay, assume 8%. If that makes you feel better, assume whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that compounding is amazing, and if you do these things, you're going to set yourself up for success. And the same thing with saving money, because you mentioned the $4,000 number, and some people will say, "Well, I don't even spend that much. So I don't know how am I going to save $4,000 a month?" And that's the only reason I say that is, yeah, that's fine. You are where you are. Do what you can.
Another rule of thumb you talk about, and we haven't talked about it on the show yet, is the rule of 72. And the reason you talk about this is small changes in investment returns also make a big difference. Can you run us through that?
Well, the rule of 72 is just how long it takes an investment to double. You just take the return you're going to get and divide it into 72. And the result is how many years it will take for your investment to double. The thing to note is that 9.3%, by the way, I assumed that because that's been the average return on an 80-20 portfolio over the last roughly 100 years. And that comes from Vanguard. They've actually updated the number. I think the number is a little higher now since I wrote the book. If you earn 9% instead of 9.3 or 9.6 instead of 9.3, believe it or not, that makes a huge difference assuming we're investing for decades. It makes a huge difference. Now, we can't control the returns of the market, right? The market's going to do what it's going to do, but we can control whether we move in and out of investments because of fear or greed, depending on what the market's doing, which can hurt our returns if we do that. We also control the expenses we pay. Are we paying an advisor 1%? Are we putting our money in expensive mutual funds? And the book talks about that. But the real takeaway is these what seem like small differences. Okay, 8.3 versus 9.3. How big a deal can that be? Well, over the course of a single year, it's probably not a huge deal. But over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's a huge difference. And the book walks through the math.
In your book, you talk about financial freedom. And I've pulled a quote out that says, "It's about how much you spend, not how much you make." And I think most people think about that the other way around. They think that whatever it is they're going to accomplish, either what they're going to purchase or what they're going to invest and save, it's about how much they make, but it really is about how much they spend. And you talk about 7 levels of financial freedom. Can you take us through those?
So what I tried to do, well, I'll just take you through them and then we can talk about them if you want. But so level 1 is basically 1 month of expenses saved. And I focus on expenses because someone could come to us, join the show right now and say, "I make $100,000 a year. How am I doing?" I don't know. What are your expenses? If you're spending $125,000, you're not doing so good, right? And we all heard of movie stars and athletes that have gone broke, making tens of millions of dollars. So in any event, the idea of level 1 month worth of expenses may not seem like a lot. I suppose in the grand scheme of things, it's not, except that you're no longer living paycheck to paycheck, right? And that's a big deal. And that's a big first step. And it can take some time to get there actually. So, and then 3 months expenses is level 2, which would be sort of the low threshold for maybe an emergency fund. 6 months is level 3. 1 year, so 1 year is level 4, 5 years is level 5, 10 years is level 6, and 25 years is level 7. By the way, level 6 is 10 years, level 7 is 25. That seems like a huge leap. I mean, we're more than doubling there at the end. Maybe I should have had 9 levels, stuck a few more in there. The reason I don't, again, is compounding. You actually get from level 6 to level 7 pretty quickly because you've got so much saved already as it's being invested. Your compounding is generating more additions to your nest egg than your job and your income. So you actually go from level 6 to level 7, in a reasonable amount of time. But that was the idea, was to base financial freedom on your expenses and what percentage of them you have saved. The reason I picked 25 years was just to use the 4% rule developed by Bill Bengen. I don't necessarily think it's the best approach once you get in retirement. I think there are probably better approaches or additional ways to think about how much you can spend. But from a planning perspective, I thought it was as good as any. So that's kind of run through it quickly. We can talk about it more, but that was the basic idea. And by the way, the other thing I point out is, having different levels of financial freedom, you think, well, what good is it going to, what's good is it going to do me now? Sure, if I get to level 7 or whatever, someday I can retire, but I'm only at level 4. What's that going to do for me today? But the answer is it gives you a great deal of freedom, and it does impact your life. Buying financial freedom, which is effectively what you're doing, puts you psychologically in a much better place. It gives you the flexibility. And I almost had to do this, of walking out on a job and going somewhere else because it's just intolerable, which you couldn't do if you were living paycheck to paycheck. So it does have some real practical benefits while you're on that financial freedom journey. It's not like you have to wait until you get to level 7 before you can start enjoying life. And that's another misconception that I think a lot of people have. I even talked to some family members. Well, I want to enjoy life now. And it's usually over the dumb stuff. It's usually over the mocha. And I say, well, I don't care if you get a mocha, but I am curious that your happiness really is contingent on getting a Starbucks every day. Really? By the way, I get Starbucks several times a week, so maybe just full disclosure.
Just before the show, I was having a little bit of a twitch, and I went out and got a Starbucks before.
Again, I want to stress that there's nothing wrong with enjoying life, however that means for you. But financial freedom should be the first priority, in my view.
I've seen people, my husband and I teach the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace class from time to time, and I can see a difference in someone's demeanor once they've got their $1,000 baby emergency fund, or when they have paid off their debt, or whatever it is. The stress that goes along with money and finances can compound in the negative direction. And when you can conquer that and get on top of it, I think it compounds your happiness and your peace and your, not being stressed. That compounds too, to me.
Absolutely.
One of the important points about your 7 levels of freedom is that, and I found this quite interesting, it takes the same time to reach level 5 as it does to go from 6 to 7. It's that last doubling time that just is amazing. And you got to stay the course, take the punch in the face, and have a plan just to get that last little bit.
Yeah. Again, the compounding starts to kick in and does more of the work than the actual savings, but it takes time to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
One of the concepts that you have, I also love, was called the Slingshot Effect. Can you take us through what you mean by a Slingshot Effect?
Yeah. So again, we're focusing on expenses for financial freedom. So if you reduce your expenses by, say, $100 a month, it does 2 things. Because it reduces your expenses, remember, we're defining financial freedom based on what you're spending each month. So if you need, 1 month, say, of expenses, for level 1, and let's assume that's $3,000. Well, if you reduce that to 2,900, now you've sort of lowered the bar. You can get to level 1 by saving just a little bit less. And of course, that flows to levels 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the way to level 7. So you've lowered the bar. You've gone and redrawn the goal line 1 yard closer to you. But at the same time, what you've done is given yourself more money to save because you now have that extra $100. So you've not only shortened the goal, you've now got more money to put towards reaching that goal. And so that's what I call the slingshot effect, the trip around the moon idea. You get that sort of double benefit as you reduce expenses, which is something, by the way, that you might not even think about, certainly you wouldn't see if you're simply defining financial freedom based on how much you make.
Yeah, I mean, just to give people numbers about the slingshot effect, which again, I think you do really well, is if you're saving only 10% at the same income as somebody else, you're spending 90%. And how long does it take you to get to 1 month's expenses? That takes you 9 months. The same person earning the same amount of money, if they have a 50% savings rate, gets to their 1 month of expenses in 1 month. It's incredible. You're 8 months shorter on that. And it makes a huge impact. We went from a savings rate, I don't even know, probably in the single or low double digits to 40% in a matter of months. It didn't change our lifestyle, and it was incredible. I mean, our lifestyle.
What did you do to accomplish that?
We controlled our spending, and we just saved first. We just made sure the money was off the table. It wasn't on the poker table. It wasn't in the pot. It went to our savings pot. And we just, watched what we did. We didn't control the little expenses. And fortunately, we have a big shovel, and we use kind of the 50-30-20 budgeting rule, and I call it reverse or backward budgeting. We are fortunate that we don't have to watch every penny, but we do watch where it goes first, second, and third.
Yeah.
Bob, I believe in your book you talked about, when you were talking about the different levels of financial freedom, I believe you have a calculator that folks can access on your website, and you talked about it in the book, of take your own numbers and plug them into the calculator, and it tells you how long it's going to take you to reach level 7 financial freedom. And I think that's wonderful, because then folks can sort of play with that. I'm assuming you can change the numbers. What if I save another $10? What if I could save another $100 and find out what the end results are?
Yeah. And it's very easy to use. And the thing that it can be hard to wrap your mind around is that your actual income, it doesn't matter. I mean, in other words, if you've got two people saving the same percentage of their income, and one makes $50,000 a year and one makes $500,000, but they're saving the same percentage of their income, they're going to reach each level at the same time, right? Because it's just a function of how much you're spending and how much percentage-wise, right? And I can certainly share with you. You guys probably have the link to the calculator, but if not, I can certainly get that to you.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Now, people hear about the 4% guideline as a rule of thumb, but I don't think and you talk about 9.3% returns based on a 70-30 or 80-20 portfolio over the last 100 years. But so how do we get from that return down to a 4% guideline? What are, say, in your estimation, the 4 major factors that reduce us to a 4% guideline withdrawal rate?
So when Bill Bengen, who's the financial planner that came up with the 4% rule, he published a paper in 94. What he did was he looked back at historical returns and inflation data, I think going back to 1926, and he was trying to figure out how long money would last over a 30-year period. And he was, rather than just assuming, say, a 9.3% rate of return, for example, he said, let's not assume anything. Let's actually look at what the markets did every year and what inflation did every year. So what would happen if someone had retired in 1926 with their money? How much could they take out in that first year? What percentage, say, of $1 million, for example? And then we'll adjust that amount for inflation each year. And would it last for 30 years if they started in 1926? And he said, okay, what if they retired in 1927 for 30 years? Would it last? And he did that all the way through 1976. the reason we go from, say, a 9.3% assumption to a 4, sometimes 4.5% initial withdrawal rate is because in coming up with that number, what Bill Bingen did was he didn't take averages. He said, well, okay, based on historical data, when was the absolute worst time to retire? Do you guys know what that was?
60s?
Yeah, it was the late 60s, 66 or 68, depending on, how you calculate it. It wasn't 1929, even though that was the biggest stock market crash, right? We lost about 90% over 3 years. The difference is we also had deflation. So if you actually retired, say, in 27 or 28, right before the big stock market crash, yeah, you lost a lot of money, but the actual dollars you were spending each year were actually going down because we had deflation for a number of years during the Great Depression. If you fast forward to the late 60s, you retire, things seem okay. Then we hit the 70s, and we all remember the 70s, right? So you had a rough stock market. 73, 74 were certainly no fun. And you had double-digit inflation, high single-digit and then double-digit inflation for like 10 or 12 years until, 1982, 83. And so you not only had some bad markets, but what you had to take out each year was going up significantly. And as it went up, it was affecting not only that year, but all future retirement years, right? And so it turns out that for those years, if you retired in the late 60s, about 4% is the most you could take out in year one. Adjust that for inflation, and you just barely get to year 30. And what Bill Bingen said was, let's be ultra conservative and assume the worst. And so there you go. There's the 4% rule. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to a chapter that's really important. And you talk about the cost of happiness and what makes you happy. And it seems like with finances, we need to assess our priorities and our goals first. Take us through your thought process on that.
On setting our financial priorities and goals?
The cost of happiness. How much does it cost to be happy?
Yeah. So the idea, honestly, a lot of my thinking on this started with my mocha. I wasn't kidding, because I would work at a Starbucks every day. I'd get a mocha every day. And for health reasons, not for money reasons, I decided I'm not going to drink a mocha. And it was painful. I mean, that's all I could think about for probably 2 weeks, as pathetic as that may sound. But after about 3 weeks, I didn't miss it, didn't care for it, didn't want it. And it just hit me. It's like, I thought I really needed that. It's like an important part of my day. And I really don't need that. Now, of course, you can apply that idea to maybe more significant things. So like we got rid of one of our cars for a number of years. My wife wasn't sure about it. I guess I wasn't either. Is this going to be an inconvenience? How's this going to work? Are we going to wish we hadn't done this? And it was great, actually. We saved a lot of money. We saved a lot of headaches. One less car had to, do the registration every year, get it inspected, take it in for maintenance. It was kind of a win-win. And so like in the book, for example, one of the things I talk about is experiments. You could do a trial run. You don't have to sell your car, but park it for 2 weeks and see what life is like. Or, I'll just use this as an example. I'm not suggesting you get rid of your TVs. Turn your TV off for 2 weeks. It's going to be painful the first few days. Maybe you'll find you like living without the TV better. I can tell you as a kid, our TV, I think I mentioned this in the book, our TV broke and we couldn't afford to get it fixed. And I mean, as a kid, that was like the worst time. I can't watch Happy Days. I don't understand how life is going to function now. I don't know what I should do. And I remember after a week or two, it was just life and you didn't think about it and you didn't miss it. And I use that a lot now in my daily life to remind myself what you think is making you happy. I mean, it's fine. We got to make choices in life. So we got to do something, but we could probably be just as happy without a lot of the stuff that we have. I'm sorry if that's a long-winded answer, but that's how I think through that issue and how I wrote about it in the book.
Yeah, there's actually a very important financial book called Atomic Habits by, I believe, Cal Newport. That's probably one of the books you should read first in order to manage your finances, is to manage your habits. And it's hard to do. You have a habit of a gym habit. I have a gym habit guilt right now because I stopped going about 6 months ago, and I'm still paying $75 a month for that guilt. I've got to take a money audit and just say, you know what, I can always go back to it. Right now, it's not a part of my life, and I should purge it from my life. One of the things you talk about in The Cost of Happiness, which I loved, is the research always points towards a happiness income of 75 to say 90,000 K of income. And then once you reach that, you can be happy. You say that's the wrong question.
Well, yeah. And again, I don't want to suggest that income doesn't matter. We all know that to some extent it does matter. But I think, again, what makes us happy I think the first step for me is recognizing that this question, what makes us happy, as simple as it may seem, is actually a very complicated question. And a question we often get wrong. And a question, the answer to which can change over time. So I look at again, the focus of the book is always on what we're spending, not what we're making. I mean, again, what we're making matters, but what we're spending and how we're spending it, I think should be the focus. And it's the focus of what I call the money audit. It's again, as we talked about, it's the focus of how I define financial freedom. So I don't know if I've answered your question, if you had something else in mind, but that's certainly how I think about it today.
We've talked a little bit about some of the aspects of the money audit, but you do have that concept in your book. Just quickly, let's run through that again, the money audit and the one and done, and what should folks be thinking about in those terms?
So my starting point is just to go through all of your monthly bills. What are they? List them out. How much are they? And you just ask a couple of questions. The first is there anything on there like a gym membership that costs $75 a month that I might not be using? Is there anything I can get rid of that I just don't need? And that becomes even more, I think, important today in the world of subscription-based everything. Everything's got a subscription, right? And so if you're not using it, that's easy, right? You're not going to miss it, so you get rid of it. In other cases, you might say, well, no, I need it, but can I get it cheaper? Either through where I'm getting it now or maybe comparison shop, whether it's car insurance or whatever. Can I reduce the costs? Because none of this is painful, right? This isn't cutting back. This isn't telling people not to go out to eat or not take a vacation. This is talking about getting rid of things you're not using right now. And for the things you are using, figuring out a way to reduce the cost. Again, once you've done that, you want to automate your savings. So you take that, whatever that amount is you've saved, and put it in the right place. But, and this is the kind of thing you could do, yearly. I mean, once you've done it once, then the next time it's usually pretty quick. But that's the focus. I would suggest you look at your debt. Can you refinance any of the debt to lower interest rates? I think, because again, that's just money you're saving. In that money, again, you could funnel it to additional savings, or you've saved some money from lowering the interest rates, just add it into your debt payments. So I start with the monthly bills. I go to looking at each debt. Can you reduce the cost of debt? By the way, in some cases, again, this is sort of gets back to the whole experiment idea. Can you get rid of something that's got the debt attached to it, like a car? And, but that's, those are, again, not everyone's going to want to do that. I get it. Some people may say, Rob, I hear you. That's fine, but I'm keeping my car. All right. You're not going to get any argument from me other than I wouldn't reject that idea out of hand. I'd at least live with the idea for a little bit, because you'd surprise yourself. We surprised ourselves when we got rid of the car. Again, we ended up getting another one a few years later because of our granddaughter. But yeah, so I mean, that's at a high level, money on it. Pretty straightforward.
And, that's probably one of the things that I liked the most in your book was this idea of just step back and think about these things. Don't assume because this is what I've always done, that this is what I'm always going to do. Or don't assume that because everybody else is doing it, this is what I need to do. I mean, this makes you think outside the box, and it makes you ask some hard questions, especially for our audience of late starters. We need to ask some hard questions.
Yes.
Doing without or changing how you do something, I think is a great question to ask on every line item of your budget.
Yeah, if I would get extreme. Again, all we're doing is thinking about this, right? We're not actually running out and making, rash decisions. But should you move where you can walk to work? Should you find a job where you can work from home? I mean, again, for some people, there may be immediate objections to that idea. If you're a quarterback in the NFL, you can't work from home. I get that. There are some jobs you got to show up. Although there are some quarterbacks that I think should stay home, but that's a whole nother. Look, I live outside of Washington D.C. That's a whole different discussion. But you really need to think outside the box and just think about these issues and live with these questions for a little bit before you reject them out of hand.
I need to bring up another concept and we've beat up on cars pretty well, but I want to mention the fact that you call the car the number one freedom fund killer. And I think that brings up in your book also the concept of opportunity cost. Can you take us through that concept and how it applies to cars?
Let me first say, you guys know my book better than I do. I'm just going to tell you that right now. You guys are amazing. Well, I just started doing the math on cars. They're next, after housing for most people, except maybe some people might have some pretty significant medical expenses, but they are our biggest expense. And unlike a house that you might own for 30 or 40 years, if you want to, you're replacing your car every so often, and they're getting more and more expensive. And then, of course, they depreciate, and then just maintaining them is very expensive. And so what would happen if you didn't have a car and you could save all of that money? Or you didn't have two cars, you just had one and you could save the cost of the second car. Or you had a car, but rather than getting a new one every 5 years or 7 years, you could maybe hold on to it for 10 years or, some longer period of time. And the book goes through all the math, but the numbers are ginormous. That's my word for it. And that's something I wish I would have known earlier on. I probably wouldn't have been so enamored with cars. Again, nothing wrong with buying a fancy car if that's what you want. For me, I put financial freedom first. If I have that settled and I want to go buy a fancy car like a Honda Odyssey, some might not think it's fancy, but who knows? Maybe I'll get even a fancier car someday. But to me, you get the financial freedom piece locked away first, because the money we put into cars could just build a tremendous amount of wealth.
No, I said Americans are enamored with their cars, and I was caught up in that for a long time. We always, at the beginning of our marriage, we always bought brand new cars. And my opinion was, I don't want to buy somebody else's problems. But then I found out the world's not going to end if I buy a used car. So it was that thinking I had to think outside the box for myself.
And how long you keep it matters a lot too. Like my wife, I got her a new car years ago, but she kept it for 17 years.
Wow.
And so, that's a long time. Now, and the car she has now, I'm confident she'll keep it for 17 years or more.
As far as my car story goes, I've only had 3 cars in my life. Now, I might have bought new and more luxury cars, but I've amortized them over 15 years a car. And my current car, which is an Audi, actually has 160,000 miles on it. Yes, it's become a higher maintenance cost, and I got to figure out, is it worth it? And should my dream car, which is a used 60,000 mile car, be coming online now because of the over-under on the cost? But I have done one thing right, even though I bought new cars. On the other hand, my wife leased a car for a long time, every 3 years, which is probably the most way to freedom fund kill on a car.
It's an expensive way to finance a vehicle, which is effectively what you're doing. I leased a car once. It was part of my business at the time, and I hated it, but did it because it made the most sense for various reasons. But to me, the thing about paying cash for a car is you tend not to spend as much too, because you hate to see all that money leave your account, which is what I did with the Honda.
You move on in your book to autopilot investing. And one of the most important parts of autopilot investing is fees. And again, it's a cost that we control in investing. Can you take us through the impact of fees in a compounding sense?
Yeah, so the insidious thing about fees is that we don't see it. The fees that a mutual fund charges or an investment advisor just comes out of your investments. So it's not like you get a bill every month. And so, out of sight, out of mind. And that's a big problem. And so people need to really focus in on fees. So if you're paying 1% in fees, and I don't remember the exact numbers in the book, but over a lifetime of investing, you're losing six figures and possibly seven, depending on how much you're saving. And that seems impossible, even six figures. How can 1%, let's say, fee turn into that kind of loss? But again, it's all compounding, and we have to keep remembering that. And so, again, a difference between an 8.3% return with, and a 9.3 because of a 1% fee is probably, I'd say, about $500,000 over a 45-year period, roughly. I don't remember the exact numbers in the book, but that sounds about right. But it's a big number is the point. And so we really need to, the first thing people need to do is figure out what they're paying. Most people don't even know. When I talk to folks, I'll say, so what are the expense ratios in your mutual funds and your 401k? And they don't have any idea. So that's the first question. Go figure it out. It's not hard to figure out.
There is a disconnect, or there was to me. Early in the podcast, we talked about you can't go from point A to point B of this is the salary and this is how much it's going to compound over years and years. I had this disconnect between my AUM fee, or assets under management fee, was 1.5%.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound bad. I mean, that's like a gnat. You just get rid of it and ignore it. But then when I did the math and realized how much it was costing me, it took my breath away.
Yeah. Well, something to keep in mind too, we talked about the 4% rule earlier. That rule, when Bengen calculated all that, he wasn't adding fees. If you had a 1.5% fee, and there's studies on this, you don't actually subtract 1.5 from 4. The math is a little more complicated than that. But, on $1 million, instead of taking out 40,000 in the first year, you might take out 30, 32, something like that. So that 1 or 1.5% fee has just cost you, we'll call it $5,000 to $10,000 in just your first year of retirement. So yeah, the fees have a significant impact on the outcomes of investing.
Let's move on to something that I actually bought the book you recommended here, something called The Progress Principle. And Van Gogh is quoted in your book as great things are done by a series of small things brought together. This is the aspect of compounding of marginal gains. Take us through what you mean by the progress principle and how it applies to our investing lifetimes.
Well, again, it kind of underscores everything we've been talking about. And I would say it's beyond just finances. I was thinking about this the other day, the idea of compounding, where you're making small steps when you look at it on a day-to-day basis or week to week or month to month, but that they compound over time. I've seen that to be true in physical fitness, nutrition. You talk about your gym membership. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, my back would go out only 2 or 3 times a year, and I couldn't walk for a week. And when I look back on going from there to where I am now, and I still have my own physical issues, but I'm in a much, much better place. I think of that progress principle and those small steps that compound, that build on each other. And you then look back and you think, wow, look at my nest egg, how it's grown over a 10 or 20 year period or whatever it may be, or how I've improved physically, if you're trying to say eat better or exercise, or even, I think it even applies to relationships. Particularly if you've got a difficult relationship, you're not going to usually solve that overnight, right? It's going to take sort of small steps over longer periods of time. I don't remember if I relate this story in the book. I just can't remember. But I remember talking to someone in business, and there was a group of us. We were talking about what our goals are. So, from one person to the next, they had all these complicated, sophisticated goals. And then one person in the group got to him and he just said, I just want to get a little better every month. If I can just make a little progress every month, I'll be good. And I thought, yeah, that's the answer right there.
So you talk in the book about excuses, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the barriers for folks to get a handle on their money or their health or their relationships? I mean, it all kind of is wrapped up into one big ball.
Well, one would be recognizing what you can control and what you can't control. We talked a bit earlier where people live paycheck to paycheck and they think that's the only option. They don't realize how much control they have over their spending. So in terms of excuses, I see a lot of them sort of come together with that one issue. They don't give themselves more credit. And sometimes they don't want it, because if they can control things, then they're responsible for not making better decisions, let's say, not to be judgmental or sound judgmental or preachy. But I think that's often why people don't want to actually acknowledge the control that they could bring to bear on whatever, in this case, finances or any other area of their lives, because then it's sort of up to them. So that's certainly one excuse. Another excuse that I've seen a lot is, again, like with investing, that it's too complicated, it's scary. It can be scary. So now what are we going to do? Now what? What's the answer? I talk to people about this. Okay, now what are you going to do? You've sort of addressed something that can be scary. I understand that it can be. So now what are we going to do? In terms of complicated, why do you believe it's complicated? Can we simplify it? So that's sort of another, I think, excuse. A third one that I'll mention, particularly when it comes to achieving financial freedom, is I want to live for today. I don't want to sacrifice today for a future that may not exist. And I think that's an important question. I think that's a fair question for people to raise. But that gets back into, well, what makes us happy? Are you sure the choices you're making are truly making you happy? How much less happy would you be if you saved a little more, right? I think when we start to examine those sorts of questions, I think a lot of people find out that maybe they could make some changes and not only not sacrifice happiness, but possibly, maybe, even come out the other end a little more content.
One of the excuses you have in there that applies to our audience is the "I'm too old" excuse. And you use a quote in the book that I think was very apropos. Your mom wondered if she was too old to go back to school in her 40s. And you said to your mom, "So, Mom, in a few years, you'll be 50. You can be 50 with a college degree or without one." How'd she do with that?
She got her college degree. She was a teacher. She taught English as a second language for a couple of decades. She retired, but she still substitute teaches today. The stories she tells are unbelievable about the kids she's met, the lives, the good things they've lived through, the bad things, a lot of kids coming from other countries. I keep telling her she should write a book, but she has written a number of children's books, which are wonderful. But I would try to encourage her to write a book about the experiences she's had in working with these kids. But yeah, she got her degree from the Ohio State University, the Buckeyes, and OH, and was a teacher for a couple of decades.
All right, we're coming to the end of our show today, and you've been incredibly helpful. Your book is incredibly helpful. We've had Sarah Catherine Gutierrez on the show talking about her book, But First Save 10. I think your book, your platform, and the way you go through this is actually unique, and it's a great companion book to her book. People talk about recommending The Simple Path to Wealth as the first book. And we just talked to J.L. Collins yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we're going to go through his book on the show. These three books together are a perfect tandem. I actually recommend Sarah Catherine's book first. And J.L. Collins thought that was hilarious because his book is often the first one everybody recommends. And actually, I have to tell a little story that Becky shared with me yesterday. Becky carries a bag of books that are The Simple Path to Wealth in the trunk of her car. The other day, I think it was last week, she went for a mammogram. And she got to talking about finances with her mammogram technician. They went back and forth about this. And then she just said, "You know what? I got something for you." So I don't know if she went out topless or not, but she did go back to her car. She grabbed a book and she gave the book to the technician. And that may forever change his life. And I think your book, in reading it, could forever change somebody's life. So thank you for giving us this gift. Let's summarize the show, Becky, for our listeners, because Rob went through a show recently where we got the shout out that was the catching up how do you catch up to retirement? What are the 7 points that he went over that were the key principles that harken back to what we've talked about in the show?
I love this. And this is a great summary of what we've been talking about. So step number 1 was to join the FIRE community. And that's probably not what anyone would expect for you to have as step number 1. So tell us why.
Well, because you effectively have to do what the FIRE community is trying to do. You're just starting later. So rather than, starting at 25 to retire at 45, you might be starting at 50 to retire at 65 or 70. But at the end of the day, it's just numbers. I know it doesn't feel that way, but it's just numbers, and what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do are pretty much the same thing. And as I mentioned earlier, you actually have a number of, you being folks starting at an older age, have some advantages called Social Security and Medicare. You get resources, you get inspiration, people to talk to when you're having a good day or a bad day. So there's obviously a lot of books in that sort of community that you might read. You've mentioned some of them already. So yeah, I think you need to embrace FIRE and the principles behind it.
Actually, we are part of the FIRE community. The only difference is it's not financial independence, retire early. It's financial independence, retire eventually.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I was going to say retire on time, but yeah, got to keep the E in there. Got it.
Exactly. All right. The second point in your show was start big, reduce spending to increase savings. Focus on your housing, move or downsize, refinance your mortgage, do all the things you can to, reduce your housing expense. We downsized. That was critical to our financial plan. The other one is transportation. Sell your car, buy a used, smaller, less expensive, more mileage car because it's a utility. You rent luxury and you buy utility. Why do we do it the other way around in our country?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, it's going to save you a lot of money, and it's probably not going to end up being as big a sacrifice as a lot of people might think.
So after start big, we have number 3, which is go small. That's the one and done principle, and the small savings are ongoing. As we were talking about earlier, we can cut out maybe a streaming subscription that we realize we're not using or whatever it is. We do that once, and then those savings continue on, and they really add up. You talked about subscriptions and insurance. There are a lot of things that can fall into this category, but I know that for us, for example, we shop our homeowners and our car insurance every year. I used to not do that, and I know a lot of people don't, but they increase. You don't notice it. And it just happens. And one day you wake up and go, wow, why is my car insurance $3,000 a year or whatever it might be? Have you got any other suggestions you can make for us on the go small?
This may or may not be small. It depends on the circumstance, but I would add in refinancing any debts you can to lower the interest rates.
Absolutely.
That could be a small debt. Maybe you've got a $2,000 credit card bill, but you can at least get the transfer to a 0% interest card, and you're just going to end up paying it off faster and for less money. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or it could be something bigger, like you mentioned earlier, refinancing a mortgage or something. But that's the kind of thing where, again, you could save money and you're not making any changes in your lifestyle at all. So I think that's, for a lot of people, a big part of the process. It was for us when we were getting out of debt.
And there's actually apps out there that you can use to roll through all your expenses, because you'll have hidden ones. You don't know them. You don't know where they are. You may have done them 10 years ago, and they're still rolling if you're not following your credit cards. And there's this 5 or 10 or however many dollar expense that's just rolling off your expenses that you have no idea. And maybe, Becky, we can look for that app. I do remember there was one, I think it's Unroll or something like that, mm-hmm. Where people can automatically go through their expenses.
Mm-hmm. Let me just drop this in. There's something else that just came to my mind. Where we live now, we don't have a choice for our power company. But when I lived in Texas, electricity is deregulated in Texas. So it was just like car insurance. Every year we shopped our power company. And, the what it boils down to is ask the questions. Always ask the questions. Can I get this cheaper? Can I get the same product, but pay less for it?
That works for cell phones too.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can shop those and make a big difference in your monthly categories. Mm-hmm. Number 4 in your list was prioritize. Things like, and this was, get your 401k match. Automatically increase your percentage without thinking about it. Pay off your debt. Prioritize you before you take care of your family. And I think you mean by that, don't sacrifice your retirement for paying for your kids' college, among other things.
Yeah, those are all important. And I would double emphasize a 401k match if you're lucky enough to have that, because that's just free money. And it can really increase, the amount of wealth that you can build in a relatively short period of time. I think I did the math on that in the book, but it's a pretty significant difference.
Well, and there's always that question that people ask about, should I pay off my debt or should I invest? So where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I know I'm not a Dave Ramsey follower on this point. I think for starters, you can pursue more than one priority at a time. I would not be paying off relatively low interest rate debt at the sacrifice of a 401k match. Particularly if you're starting at 50 and you've got a lot of catching up to do. The math it doesn't make any sense to do that. Mm-hmm. I would get as much of the match as I could, while perhaps still paying off debt faster than the minimum payments if I can. But to me, you're going to end up much better off when it's all said and done if you've taken advantage of the 401k match.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I agree with you. There are a few of Dave Ramsey's points that I don't completely agree with, but I agree. You need to get the free money.
I certainly agree with his view that you want to get out of debt.
All right. The next thing you talk about is sort of in the grow your income category so you can grow the gap. And you say build lifestyle-friendly sources of income. Can you give us some examples?
So you could start a podcast and then start advertising. I don't know. Again, this won't be for everyone, but I started a YouTube channel. Now, when I started it, I wasn't thinking, well, I'll make money from it. And that's why I want to do it. It does make some money. And, I'm here in my basement talking to you. This is where I record my YouTube videos. So it's a very lifestyle friendly business. I record a video when I want to. If I don't want to record a video one day, I don't. Even if you make a relatively small amount of money, again, we know what this turns into over time, right? So, you can just get a online savings calculator. So, well, if I make $500 a month, how much faster can I pay down my debt? Or how much more can I save as I'm trying to get to retirement eventually, right? That's the word, eventually. Again, it won't be for everyone. And, I like online businesses because that's just what I've done the last 15 years. But there could be other things. Some people maybe just do some consulting, depending on what industry they're in. But if it's a lifestyle friendly, then I think that's key. Now, by the way, you can always choose to sacrifice, right? Some people will choose just to work 3 jobs. I'm not here to say that's a bad choice. In my list, I was trying to focus on stuff that might align with a lifestyle that doesn't work 3 jobs.
Right. So number 6 is stay positive. So what has that got to do with our money?
Well, yeah. It particularly if you've started late, like we're talking about, there's going to be times when you're going to get down on yourself, either because you overspent one month or the stock market went down or the water heater went out and it was like not what you were hoping for that month. And so staying positive can sometimes be difficult. And I think that's where being a part of the FIRE community, having a good relationships in your life, can help. But I think it's important. I think it's important as you work through this. I think it's important too to recognize you're going to have bad months or bad days financially. Don't think it's all going to be just an easy upward climb. There are going to be some setbacks. So expect it, not in a negative way, but just I think you set the right expectation and then have a network of friends, a community, could be online, in the real world, whatever, that you can talk to, that you can share this with and keep up your spirits.
That's why we created our community. And there's
exactly.
there's so much positivity, so much reassurance, encouragement, answering of questions, and we're seeing it grow. People need this message, and they need to share the fact that things haven't always gone on like they wanted them to, but they've started and they're moving forward. And we talk about catching up to FI together. Number 7 is also a good one, I think. It's use free tools available to evaluate your retirement readiness. You talk about Empower. I use Empower. You talk about Google Sheet templates. You talk about Mint. Can you take us through, especially Empower, and what does that do for you?
So Empower used to be called Personal Capital. It's a free financial dashboard. So just to understand the business model, Empower manages folks' investments for a fee for assets under management. So they're using the financial dashboard basically as a way to market their investment management services, but you don't have to hire them to use the tool. You can use the tool for free. I've used it for free for more than 10 years, and they don't manage my investments. But the tool, you can connect your bank accounts, your credit cards, your retirement accounts, brokerage account. It'll import all of your data automatically. There's a cash flow section, so you can track your budget. It sort of automatically categorizes your spending. You can change the categories if they get it wrong from time to time. All these programs do. But then you can look at your asset allocation for your investments. You can run a fee analyzer. Talk about the importance of fees. It will look at all of the mutual funds and ETFs that you've brought in from the accounts you've connected. It knows the expense ratios. If you do pay an investment advisor, you can factor that into the fee analyzer, and it will show you just how much these fees will cost you from today until whatever age you plan to retire. So it'll actually put an actual number on the fees, which I think is important. There is a retirement planner as part of the program. It's not the most sophisticated, but I think it's a very good one, particularly if you're still working and you sort of want to get a rough idea of how things are going towards retirement. I think once you get into retirement, there are better options for folks in or near retirement. New retirement's one that I like a lot for that. But yeah, Empower is probably the best all around free financial tool to sort of just manage your financial life.
Yeah, I mean, I use Empower. I found it very powerful. It's also reassuring. You can watch your progress, and that to me is very important. Now, you don't want to look at your portfolio or net worth every day. I got into the habit of doing that. It's kind of like the daily latte or mocha, and I was like, "Come on, let's go, let's increase." I think what you need to do is probably look at it every 6 months. Is more a better motto, actually. So your mocha every 6 months would be your Empower every 6 months. I want to say thank you for coming on to Catching Up to FI. This has been an incredibly valuable conversation. In conclusion, and we've talked about all these things, but do you have a specific actionable tip that you would have for our late starter listeners on our exit here? Is there 1 or 2 things that you really want to tell them today?
I think the one thing I would tell them, and your podcast is a great start in terms of resources, but is to constantly be learning. Because, I've been writing about personal finance and investing, podcasts, YouTube channels since 2007, and I'm learning something new every single day. And so, particularly, for folks that have started late, I think it's very, very doable what they're trying to achieve, but it's still not easy. Right? It's a challenge. And I think through podcasts like yours, some of the books you've mentioned, the FIRE community, they can be constantly learning, not only sort of the numbers and how to invest and which funds and those sorts of things, but also learning from other people's experiences as they're engaging, in your community or other FIRE communities. And so, to me, that's a process, and it's really a never-ending process. But that's the one thing I would encourage folks to do, but to actually think about, have that sort of frame of mind of being a lifelong learner in a lot of fields, but in this case, as it relates to money and specifically achieving financial independence in a relatively short period of time.
So, Bob, along that line, do you have some particular books or blogs or, what resources might you recommend to some of our listeners?
That's a good question. Well, apart from your podcast, you could just start there, right? But they're already listening. They already know that. I think from an inspirational perspective, which is an important part of this. I think Mr. Money Mustaches is probably the best. It would be worth people reading his blog from start to finish, actually. And I interviewed Pete back in like 2008, I think, on my podcast. But that would be one that I would certainly recommend. The books you've mentioned, I think, are all great. I mean, I think that's a good place to go. Actually, Reddit. There are a number of fire communities on Reddit, not just one. There's fire, there's lean fire, there's chubby fire, there's fat fire. They can be a great source, both of information and of resources and ideas and community. So I would certainly recommend those as well.
Oh, my goodness. I'm a little chubby. I got to work on the incremental health issues, and I had never heard of chubby fire. That is a new one. Maybe I'm a chubby fire aficionado in addition to a catching up to fire. I mean, I need to work on being lean fire. I know lean fire means more financial fire, but I think it's a healthy fire too. When you lean. All right. In conclusion, we need to know where people can reach you. Your platform is excellent, but tell us how many different ways can they reach you, and what do you recommend for them along the lines of your platform?
I would recommend probably YouTube. If you just search Rob Berger. I actually have 2 YouTube channels, but the main one that talks about investing in retirement, if you just search Rob Berger, you'll find it. I do a live Q&A show I just did it last night, but I do it every other Monday at 7 p.m. where, it's a live show. People can ask questions via chat. So, they'll get to know me for better or worse. They'll get to know me from that live Q&A and can ask questions. I send out a newsletter and I put a link. It's a free newsletter, but I put a link below every YouTube video. And I encourage people to respond to the newsletter and ask me anything they want. And a lot of times those questions become the inspiration of a topic for video that I'll put up on YouTube. So that's probably, I have robberger.com, so they can check me out there as well. But I think the YouTube channel is probably the place to start.
Well, Rob, this has been excellent. You have dropped a lot of knowledge bombs for our audience, little golden nuggets that they're going to get from this. We thank you so much for joining us today. And we know that that folks are going to find you on your YouTube channel and just build their community of use as you have suggested. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, guys, thanks for having me. I really had a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. This has been excellent. Hopefully, we'll see you again soon.
Great.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to 5. We would appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
We are not lawyers, financial advisors, accountants, or tax experts. Please consult your own professional advisors before making any important decisions. Our content is for entertainment and education purposes only.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to 5.